I've never been the kind of guy with a career. I was more the odds and ends type. Whatever paid the bills. Construction, delivery, even telemarketing for a few miserable weeks. That's how I became a johatsu, a night mover. In Japan, the johatsu are known as the evaporated, people who disappear without a trace. They want a fresh start, away from the debt, stalkers, or just the burden of life they've built. But there's another side to it. The ones who help them disappear. That was us. We'd show up after dark, no lights, no noise, pack up everything and leave as if nothing had ever been there. The less we knew about the clients, the better. No real names, no questions, cash only. Most of the time, the jobs were pretty straightforward. We'd move people escaping abusive relationships, financial ruin, or shady business deals that went belly up. Sometimes it was kind of sad. Quiet families, hollow eyes, kids clutching toys as they vanished into the night. Other times it was almost too easy. An empty apartment, bags already packed, just a quick grab and go. I learned not to ask about what was left behind. But not every job was easy. Some of them I still have nightmares about. The first job was this woman, thin with wild hair and darting eyes, like she was waiting for someone to burst through the door at any second. We got the call late at night, like usual, and when we arrived she was already waiting, clutching her arms like they were the only things holding her together. She didn't say much, just rushed us inside, glancing over her shoulder at every little sound. The creak of a door, the hum of a passing car. Every time something happened, she'd freeze, then whisper, "Hurry, we need to move faster and keep quiet, please." At first I figured it was just another case of someone running from an abusive ex, which wasn't uncommon for us. But this was different. It was the way she kept looking out the window that started to get to me. Like any second, someone might show up. My partner, Kenji, tried to crack a joke to ease the tension, but she just glared at him wide-eyed and hissed at him to be quiet. Once everything was packed, she didn't even ride with us. She just told us to meet her at the new place, way out in the country. She took off without another word. Our truck rattled along the empty roads for what felt like hours. We pulled up to this old, isolated house. It was quiet, no lights, no sign of life. We waited and waited. But she never showed. We called her phone, left voicemails, sent texts. We didn't know what else to do, so we ended up unloading her stuff into the house just like she told us. By dawn, we were exhausted, confused, and more than a little spooked. So we left. A few days later, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I looked her up, out of curiosity. Turns out she wasn't just running from an ex. She was mixed up with the Yakuza, a snitch. Word was she was about to testify against some dangerous people. The cops suspected she'd been followed the night we moved her, likely taken care of between her old house and the new one. It was scary to think how close we were to death, just minutes from it. I try not to think about what would have happened if she'd driven with us. The second job was in an old, creaking apartment building. We were called to move an elderly man, someone who looked like he belonged in that place, tucked away from the world, forgotten. When he let us in, I knew right away this wasn't going to be a normal job. The apartment was filled with strange trinkets, objects I couldn't name, artifacts that looked ancient. There were statues with twisted faces, masks with hollow eyes, symbols painted on the walls in faded reds and blacks. The air was thick, the kind of thick that makes your body extra heavy. The others got to work, packing boxes, wrapping up the artifacts as carefully as they could. But I couldn't shake the feeling the room was watching me. Then, as I was lifting a box, I noticed a door across the room I was sure hadn't been there before. It was just there, dark and slightly ajar. I glanced around, but no one else seemed to notice it. So I walked over and opened the door. Inside was another room, cluttered with more of those artifacts. I stepped in, trying to get a closer look at a strange but small statue covered in symbols. When I turned back to leave, the doorway was gone. Panic shot through me. I swiveled on the spot, thinking I'd just gotten turned around. But now there were 2 doors on the opposite wall. I chose the one on the right and walked through, only to find myself in another room, nearly identical to the last, with the same dusty shelves and dark corners. The walls seemed to stretch and bend, twisting in ways that didn't make sense. I called out to my coworkers, but no one responded. My voice just echoed, lowering in tone until it didn't even sound like mine. I walked faster, every doorway leading me to another room that looked the same as the last. It was as if the apartment was folding outwards from itself, trapping me in some kind of expanding nightmare maze. The walls began to narrow, closing in, and I started to run. Every doorway was a dead end, a mirror of the room before, filled with more statues, more hollowed-eyed masks watching me. My breath came in short gasps, and every time I looked over my shoulder, I thought I saw a shadow moving in the corner of my eye. The further in I went, the more I saw the shadow, dipping out of view just as I turned to see it. I lost track of time. Every step, every turn led me deeper into that labyrinth of rooms. I shouted, banged on walls, and all the while, the shadow got closer. The air grew heavier, suffocating. My chest tightened. The shadow was starting to get darker, more detailed, like it was slowly forming into something solid. I started to smell something rotten, like old meat from an animal's breath. I was exhausted and about ready to give up completely. Let whatever would happen, happen. But then I saw a faint light through a doorway ahead. I bolted toward it, nearly tripping over my own feet as I pushed through the door and staggered back into the main room. I glanced back, half expecting to see the twisted maze behind me. But it was just a wall. The doorway was gone, as if it had never existed. Everything was just as it was when I went into the nightmare maze. Time hadn't passed a single second while I was gone. A month later, we started work on the Fujimoto Danshi complex. That was the last time I worked as a jihatsu. We were called in late to an old decaying apartment building, the kind that hadn't seen a new coat of paint since it was built. The family that hired us were strange, even by our standards. The father answered the door, tall, rail-thin, and pale as death. His skin looked translucent, almost bluish in the dim hallway light, and he didn't smile, just nodded once and waved us inside. The mother wasn't any better, silent, watching us with dark, sunken eyes like she hadn't slept in days. They both seemed like they were holding something back, like we were intruding on a private moment. The father told us to avoid the room at the end of the hall until the very end, his voice cold and distant. We didn't ask questions. We never did. Just nodded and got to work. The apartment was huge, bigger than any I'd seen in the city. High ceilings, ancient wood floors, thick velvet curtains that blocked out all the light. It felt like stepping into a different century. As we moved through the place, loading up the truck with old furniture and boxes, the feeling of something being off only grew stronger. The air inside was stale, thick with the smell of dust and something else. Something rotten. The father hovered near the back of the apartment, watching us with cold, sunken eyes, and the mother disappeared into the room at the end of the hall, leaving us mostly alone. An hour ticked by, and we were almost done. There was just one room left. The room they told us to avoid. We had just started packing up the last boxes when Riku winced. I looked over and saw him clutching his hand. He'd cut it on a loose nail from one of the old crates we were moving. "You good?" I asked, keeping my voice low. Riku nodded. The father appeared again, pale and silent. He glanced at the small pile of remaining boxes, then toward the door at the end of the hall. He said that it was time, and without another word, he opened the door to the forbidden room. Out stepped a young girl, barely a teenager by the looks of her, with skin as pale as her parents. Her hair hung limp around her shoulders, and her eyes were wrong, too wide, too dark. She moved like she was half asleep, until she caught the scent of something in the air. The little girl froze mid-step, her head snapping toward Riku. Her eyes locked on his hand, and something primal, something savage flickered across her face. It happened so fast I barely registered it, but I saw her nostrils flare, then she attacked. It was like a blur, a flash of pale skin and teeth. She lunged at Riku, sinking her teeth into his neck before any of us could react. The scream that tore out of him was like nothing I'd ever heard. We all froze for half a second, too stunned to move. By the time we recovered, Riku was already slumped on the floor, and half of his neck was gone. The father's eyes went wide briefly, then calmed. Oh no. The girl wasn't done. She crouched over Riku, and when she lifted her head, her eyes burned with something feral. Something inhuman. Then she went for the next guy, Yasu. Yasu ran out the front door, the little girl chasing after him. The mother appeared in the doorway now, eyes wide and panicked, and called for the little girl, whose name was apparently Izumi. But the mother wasn't going to have any control of her now feral daughter. In fact, she wouldn't even have control of herself, or her husband. Because I watched as the mother and father smelled the air, and lost control of themselves. I grabbed the nearest thing I could, some old lamp, and swung it at the mother, but she was too fast, too strong. She dodged, her movements fluid, unnatural, as if she could read my thoughts before I even acted. I ran. I didn't even think, just bolted for the front door. I turned left to hit the elevators, but found the little girl straddling Yasu's decapitated body, her mouth dug into his open neck cavity. A scream carried over from my right, and I saw an open apartment door with a tough-looking guy walking out. Behind me, I heard the mother and father scurrying out of the room. I ran past the tough-looking guy and into his apartment. I locked the door and heard him banging against it, then screaming as he was getting torn apart. My eyes scanned the room, and that's when I saw it. A katana hanging on the wall. I didn't think. I grabbed it, checked the blade. It was dull as fuck, just for show, but I kept it anyway. Outside, the sounds of carnage echoed into the apartments, screams, snarls, the tearing of flesh. I threw open the window and spotted the fire escape, but it only led one way. up. I climbed. Behind me, I heard the window shatter as the girl leapt out after me. Her nails scraped against the metal as she climbed, too fast, too relentless. I swung the sword as she reached for my ankle, and it connected. She let out an inhuman shriek as she fell, her body crashing to the ground below. I looked down and saw her body. Her lower half was twisted backwards, head was split open, and arms were bent in unnatural angles. But she kept moving, crawling, trying to get back to the building, and I kept climbing. I reached the roof and collapsed, but only for a moment. I rushed over to the rooftop door and pressed myself against it. I could hear the others below, the bloodlust in their voices growing louder. I blocked the door with everything I could find and prayed. Finally, the first rays of sunlight crept over the horizon. I listened as the people below screamed as the sunlight through the windows was hitting them. But I knew they weren't all gone. Not yet. And my only way out was back down, through the apartment building. With nothing but the dull samurai sword, I crept back inside. I went through the rooftop door, quietly sneaking into the stairwell. There were 10 floors, with only a few of them still having lights on, so I had to make my way down 10 flights of stairs, most of which were pitch black. As I descended, I realized that most of the tenants had the same idea to make a break for the stairwell. Only, none of them appeared to make it. The stairs and all the landings were horrific, gruesome sights. Shredded bodies, organs, bones, blood. It was a slaughterhouse. I was halfway down the stairwell when I heard something below. A low, wet squelch, like skin slapping against blood-soaked concrete. I froze, clutching the samurai sword in my hand, heart pounding. I crept down the next flight, careful not to slip or make any noise. I reached the landing for the floor we'd been working just hours earlier, and stopped dead in my tracks. The floor was a massacre. Blood splattered the walls and body parts, mangled beyond recognition, were strewn about. But it was the body in the middle of it all that made my stomach turn. It was Genko, or what was left of him. His body was completely torn open, organs spilling across the landing, bones pulled from muscle and tendon. His face, what little was left of it, was frozen in a twisted, agonized scream. The sight of him, someone I'd worked alongside for months, made bile rise in my throat. I had to step over him to keep moving. There was no other choice. I stepped gingerly over his body, careful not to disturb anything. But just as my foot touched the other side of the landing, I heard it. A low, guttural growl from behind me. I whipped around just in time to see Genko's hand twitch. His eyes, once glassy and dead, snapped open, glowing with a sickly red light. Blood began to pool around him, bubbling as if something inside him was trying to force its way out. Before I could react, Genko's body jerked violently. His limbs snapped back into place with a sickening crack, and his mouth stretched open, revealing elongated razor-sharp teeth. Blood dripped from his mangled face as he let out a feral screech, his arms reaching out for me. He was no longer human. I stumbled backward, tripping over the stairs as Genko's twisted form lunged toward me. He moved unnaturally, like a puppet on broken strings, dragging what remained of his body across the landing, his hands clawing at the air. I fell down a flight of stairs, the sword slipping from my grip as I crashed to the ground. My vision blurred for a second, but the sound of Genko's screech shook me back into reality. I got a hold of the dull katana and kept moving. He was still coming, his body crawling, tumbling and dripping down the stairs after me. His limbs were broken, muscles mush, but that didn't stop him. It didn't matter how shattered his body was, there was something in his blood now that kept him moving, kept him hungry. But it wasn't just him. The whole stairwell seemed to be waking up. I scrambled to my feet, slipping on the blood that now coated my shoes. Every step was a nightmare. I couldn't get a grip, couldn't move fast enough. I fell again, sliding down another flight as Genko's screeches echoed through the stairwell, each one louder and more frantic than the last. I could hear them now, others responding to the sound. The tenants. The entire building was awake, joining the shredded bodies coating the floors and walls of the stairwell as they all made chase for me. Above me, doors slammed open. The low growls and screeches of the tenants filled the air, growing louder and closer. They knew I was still here, and they were coming. I pushed myself up, forcing my legs to move, forcing my body to keep going. I was almost at the bottom, just a few more steps. I reached the main lobby, throwing myself through the door and slamming it shut behind me. The door wouldn't hold them for long, but it bought me a second. I looked for any way out. And that's when I saw her. Standing between me and the front doors, looking just as innocent as she had before the attack, was Izumi, the little girl. Her skin had healed, though her clothes were bloody and destroyed. She smiled. I didn't stop. I didn't think. I ran straight for her, gripping the samurai sword tight. She didn't move, didn't flinch. As I barreled toward her, I rammed the dull blade through her chest, using the momentum to push us both forward. The sword didn't do anything. She wasn't even fazed by it. But as we crashed through the front doors, the sunlight hit her face, and she screamed. I shoved her body to the side just as her skin ignited, flames crawling over her tiny frame, reducing her to ash in seconds. Behind me, the tenants burst from the stairwell, screeching and hissing as they chased after me. The sunlight hit them, and they burst into flames, one after another, exploding into plumes of ash. I kept running. I didn't look back. I don't know how long I ran, or how far. It wasn't until my legs gave out that I realized I was in the middle of the countryside, surrounded by nothing but open fields. I collapsed, chest heaving, hands shaking, covered in blood and ash. But I was alive. I never went back, to the job, to the building, or even that part of the city. I moved back to the States. I work in a call center now. I hate it. But now when I get a weird client, I just hang up.